Hey Wizards, guess what? It's Kimise, and I'm here, and I want to give you guys some of my favorite tips on crafting in Wizard 101. Okay, tip number one. You can always go back and pick up some side quests, but take my advice. Grab the crafting and farming quests as soon as they're open to your wizard. For instance, this will benefit your wizard in a couple of ways. It gives you access to some really great recipes, access to reagents that will help you craft this gear as well. Also, if you're a housing decorator, this sets you up to be able to craft some really great decorations for your house or your dorm. Tip number two, get recipes everywhere. You can find recipes for almost everything in Wizard 101. Basic gear recipes are found in the starting area of each world. This includes athames, rings, wands, robes, boots, and hats. This is where you can find your basic gear for each world. Most people ignore this, but if you're looking for specific look from a world, start there. Housing recipes per world are generally found in the starting areas as well. Great for theming out your housing with a specific style. Don't ignore the jewel crafting recipes. Usually a vendor found at the beginning of the areas will sell these jewel crafting recipes. You can craft specific jewels for your school. It's a great way to get some quality jewels without having to worry about what gets dropped. Also, premium gear is found throughout the progress of each of the different worlds. It's basically designed to line up with your character's level as you progress to each of these areas, but a lot of times you'll level up way before you can find the crafting gear. So a good tip on this one, if you know another wizard that can let you port into that area, you can get those recipes a little bit earlier. And these are great for aesthetics you don't generally see in other places. And it's a really great way to diversify your playstyle, especially if you want to do some dual school. Okay guys, here is tip number three. Research plants to help you gather reagents. Now in tip number one, I said start the farming quest. Why? Because farming reagents can save you lots of time because it gets your reagents passively. You just got to check your plants once a day. So different plants will drop different reagents. If you start this early, it pays off, especially in the late game when you're trying to craft some of those really great spells. For instance, I personally farm couch potatoes for mega snacks. So that's one of my big farming crops, but my other big farming crop is king parsley. Now the nice thing about king parsley is that they're always dropping seeds. So you can create, so even though if you're only starting with one king parsley seed, you can actually create that into a large crop over a period of time. And by the time you get to the point where you can craft those really cool spells, you will have more than enough amber to do that crafting. Not to mention, king parsley also drops diamonds, and I'll tell you what, diamonds are a pain in the butt to go looking for sometimes. Farming is a down-the-road type strategy, but it pays off when you don't have to grind Cronus forever. Okay, with tip number four, this is about setting up good play habits. For instance, let's talk about the bazaar. The bazaar can be a great place, but it can also be a really frustrating place. Now, throughout the game, you're going to be dumping a lot of gear you don't use at the bazaar, whether it's robes, hats, athames, wands. Sometimes it's reagents. Sometimes it's like those snacks that you'll never use, those really low-level snacks. If you have enough of them, they can turn into gold. Well, guess what you can do with this gold? Every time you stop at the bazaar, go over to the reagent tab and see what they're selling. Now, you might not find much of anything. Like, for instance, I would personally not buy the jewels. I would never buy things like ghost fire or coal that you can get at any other reagent vendor at a much lower cost. But those gathered reagents, or sometimes those rare reagents, do pop up on occasion. And if you're checking it every time you go in to sell some stuff, guess what? You're going to find some gems. And even if you don't find some gems, gather all the mistwood stone, red mandrake that you can, because those basic reagents will easily help you upgrade and get those into rare reagents. And if you have a lot of those basic ones, then the rare reagents aren't as tough later on. This is also a great strategy to use with some of those treasure cards. So let's say you're wanting to craft something like Pigsy or Cronus, which are some really awesome spells. Well, you need some treasure cards of those spells. Pan over to the treasure card area and see if there's any of those selling. Take a moment, grab those. Sometimes you find them, sometimes you don't. But if you're checking every time you're in the bazaar, the chances of you finding them go up. Okay, guys, here's tip number five. Always be gathering. ABG? Oh, anyways, always be gathering. So what do I mean by this? If you see your reagent, grab it. Even if it's not one you're collecting. If you're running around your wizard through those different areas, because you will be, let's be honest, grab the reagents. Every time you grab reagents, it's well worth it. You should, instead of porting from one area to another, walk it. gather the reagents going on. Make these habits. Yeah, it might add like maybe another 30 seconds to your walk, but if you've grabbed some reagents that end up stacking up in your reagent collection, it pays off in the end because then that's one less reagent you're going to have to gather later. You'd be surprised at how quickly reagents add up by doing these simple things. Tip number 6, transmute. When you are going around to those recipes, make sure you're grabbing every transmute recipe, because these transmutes will allow you to take your very basic reagents, such as Black Lotus, and be able to transmute them into much more rare drops like Nightshade, or from stone or ore into things like diamonds or sandstone or even sunstone. So don't miss these. Make sure every time you're hitting one of those recipe shops, you take a moment and you buy those transmute recipes. A lot of times you'll find them with, well, actually you can find them with any basic recipe vendor. Just make sure you tab over to the cards, treasure cards, and the reagent recipes, because that's where you'll find the transmute recipes. Okay, tip number 7. Farming your reagents. And what do I mean by farming? What I mean is by running around and gathering up your reagents. That's the word we tend to use. So basic farming. Here's some tips on doing basic farming. Determine which reagent are you looking for. Like for instance, let's say you're looking for red mandrake root. You know, the dark cave's not a bad place to get red mandrake root. So go down to the dark cave. Usually there's about 3 or 4 red mandrake root drops there. Start at the beginning of the dark cave, go all the way around, and don't only collect the red mandrake roots, but collect every single reagent you see in there. One, that gives you a backstock. Do a full circle of the area, because if you start on one end, you can usually find a circular path through the area. And then when you get back to your starting point, here's the trick. Go into your server selection and select a different server. What I like to do is I like to start at one end and just rotate through all the different server spots until I get all the way back to the beginning. It takes a little bit of time, but you can usually do this pretty quickly. You'll collect a ton of reagents, and if you go through all the different servers that are open and you flip through each of the different worlds, okay, through that same section, that same area, a lot of times you'll collect with at least 2 to 3 drop points per area, like in the dark cave red mandrake roots. You'll usually end up with anywhere from 100 to 150 reagents of that particular one. Not to mention, if you're doing it, the chances of you getting a rare drop are there as well. So you'll end up with anywhere from like 5 to 20 of the rare drop reagents of that particular type of reagent. So really great strategy. If you just have to go out and gather, this is the one I prefer. Just got to keep your eye out as to where those particular reagent drops tend to pop up. Tip number 8, farming dropped reagents. Now, dropped reagents, I'm talking about, you know, you're having to go into get a fight to get some of these reagents. Probably the most common one you hear about all over the servers, amber, because that is what you need to craft some of the cool spells. Another one, especially in later game, that you'll hear about is, of course, the flying squid ink. So I'm going to use the flying squid ink as an example. Now these are kind of a pain in the butt because you got to wait for the boss to drop them, and usually you're having to go into a dungeon. Sometimes these fights are difficult, sometimes these fights are just humdrum. In the case of Cronus, if you are on level, they can be a challenge, so going in with a group or going in with somebody else who's farming it, like an upper level, tend to be a great strategy because you go in there, knock out the fights, and pop right out. Now, something like the Flying Squid Ink, if you're doing that on level, it's a 3-fight dungeon, and the first 2 fights are usually not that tough, but the third one can be kind of a pain even if you're doing it solo. It's certainly doable solo, but groups are better. Here's my hint. Thin your deck down. Make sure you have a quick hit and get out deck strategy. If you're doing something like the Flying Squid Ink, figure out how the rates drop. Like for instance, there's 3 fights in there, but usually even if you go through the whole dungeon, at the most you'll get 2 squid ink, and that's if the last guy decides to drop. So be smart about it. Like when I find Flying Squid Ink, if I'm doing it solo, I'll go in, I'll hit the first fight. If I get the Flying Squid Ink, I get right out, because usually you're not going to get 2 drops out of the second guy. You're not going to get a drop out of the second guy if you get it out of the first guy. So I get right, then I go back in, reset the dungeon, it resets the drop, so the chance of it dropping for me from one of those 2 guys goes up. That shortens the amount of time that I have to farm that particular dungeon, and allows me to get the squid ink, I would say at least maybe a third quicker. And that's what I mean by figuring out the rates of how those things drop, because sometimes there might be a hack that'll allow you to get that reagent quicker. Tip number 9, leverage your other wizards. Now, if you're like most of us, you got multiple wizards, you might have tried some of these paths with some of your other wizards. So a good strategy is to maybe have a wizard that's a crafting genius. Have him craft gear for your other wizards. Maybe he has all the recipes, he has all the locations and everything, and so he can just go ahead and go in there and craft. You can do that. You can have your ice wizard craft your death wizard's basic gear. It happens. I've done it before. It's not a bad strategy. Also, let's say you're not wanting to do that, but you need some reagents. Check your other wizards. Maybe you don't have a crafting wizard, but he's gathered a bunch of reagents through fights, through drops, etc. A lot of times that's another way where you can get some of those rare reagents that, come on, let's be honest, take a while to pick up. Remember, reagents are one of the things that you can share in your shared bank, unlike treasure cards. Finally, tip number 10. Don't miss those double reagent drop weekends when you are a member. They are absolutely fabulous, and they will make things go a lot quicker. If you've ever done the Dragoon gear where you're having to like get all those different crystals and salts and drops from those fantastic dungeons down there in Wizard City at level 130, you know exactly what I mean. Go in there, get those double drops for agents. It saves you time and effort, especially like flying squid ink or even amber. Also, don't forget to celebrate. When you hit these crafting badges, wear them proud. Be the crafter you've always wanted to be and show it off how much that hard work has paid off for you. This is Kimise. Catch you guys later. Bye-bye.